Welcome back to the channel. Great to have you here. Welcome to Mystic Cat Stories, where lost places breathe again, strange artifacts resurface, and mysteries linger in the dark. Make sure to subscribe if you want stories that balance between fact and something far more disturbing. On a spring morning in 2024, an air traffic controller at Anchorage International Airport noticed a small radar blip appear at roughly 10,000 feet. The signal moved slowly at the pace of an old turboprop aircraft and wasn't transmitting any transponder data. No one responded to radio calls at first, but a few minutes later, a faint static-filled voice came through. The pilot identified himself as the captain of Flight 612 en route from Seattle to Anchorage, requesting permission to land on schedule. At first, the controller thought it was a prank. There were no flights with that number, and the signal sounded analog, more like a radio transmission from the 1980s than a modern digital frequency. But the heading and coordinates matched an old route that had been shut down decades ago. When the pilot repeated his request, the room went silent. The voice didn't sound synthetic. It sounded human, calm, and professional. After a short discussion with the tower chief, they authorized an emergency landing. Far down the runway, the ground crew spotted something moving through the haze. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then the shape of a large, rust-streaked airliner emerged from the clouds, an old Lockheed L-188 Electra streaked with oil and soot. The landing gear was down. The plane touched down smoothly, rolled to a stop at the far end of the runway, and went quiet. No flames, no damage, no distress beacon. Security vehicles surrounded the aircraft. When the door opened, a man in a pilot's uniform stepped out. The insignia on his jacket was from Pan American World Airways, a company that hadn't existed for over 40 years. He descended the stairway slowly and said the first thing witnesses remembered. "What happened here? Why does the tower look different?" His voice was steady but tired, as if he really believed he'd just arrived from the past. Within minutes, the crew was escorted into the terminal. The pilot, co-pilot, and flight attendant appeared confused but cooperative. They claimed they had departed that same morning and were expecting to arrive in Anchorage 6 hours later. Nothing unusual, they said. Clear skies, stable instruments, routine flight. They were simply shocked that the airport staff were wearing uniforms they didn't recognize. When investigators boarded the plane, the situation became even stranger. 92 passengers were seated calmly in their seats, men, women, and children, pale, disoriented, but unharmed. Their tickets were printed with the logo of Pan Am, all authentic vintage cardstock, with serial numbers that hadn't been in use since the early 1980s. One passenger looked at a security officer's badge and asked, "Why does your money say United States, but the bills look wrong?" Medical staff examined everyone, pulse, temperature, blood pressure all normal. Their IDs were genuine, yet the social security numbers matched people who had died decades ago. Their luggage contained eerie, Pacific belongings, plywood suitcases, Marlboro cigarettes in old soft packs, children's tin toys. Everything was perfectly preserved, as if pulled from a museum exhibit. Military personnel soon arrived and sealed off the area. The airport went into lockdown. The event never reached the media. The plane was towed into a closed hangar under the pretense of a safety drill. A technician inspecting the fuselage noticed a faded stencil on the side. Flight 612, Seattle to Anchorage, 1982. According to FAA archives, Flight 612 vanished on July 7, 1982, somewhere over the Alaska Range. Search teams had combed a 500-mile sector, finding no wreckage, no distress calls. The crew and passengers were declared dead, and the case quietly closed. Now, over 40 years later, the same plane sat intact on the tarmac, as if it had simply slipped through time. The pilot's name was David Mercer. Records listed him as born in 1942, but he looked no older than 40. When questioned about the date, he said it was July 7, 1982. When shown a newspaper from 2024, he went still and whispered, "That's not possible." The rest of the crew behaved the same way, shocked but composed. An investigator later wrote, "They weren't faking. They genuinely had no idea what year it was." When technicians inspected the cockpit, they found every instrument clean and fully functional. No dust, no corrosion. Even the analog clock on the dashboard showed the moment of landing, 1:32 p.m., the exact time the blip appeared on radar. In the cargo bay were sealed mailbags bearing 1982 postmarks, letters addressed to people long deceased, paper crisp, ink unfaded. Laboratory analysis confirmed the materials were authentic and free of modern compounds. It was as if the plane had traveled through a vacuum. The passengers were moved to an isolated facility near the airport. They spoke little, ate almost nothing, and avoided looking out windows. One man asked to call his daughter in Seattle. When told that 42 years had passed, he sat down and covered his face with his hands. Witnesses said he remained that way for hours. Within days, federal agencies arrived. The hangar was surrounded by concrete barriers, guarded night and day. Only a handful of investigators were allowed inside. Tests on the fuselage showed that the aluminum alloy hadn't corroded. Its aging was equivalent to less than 10 years of exposure. "Impossible," wrote one chemist. When asked to retrace his route, Captain Mercer marked the same corridor approved in 1982 and pointed to the spot where he entered the clouds and lost sight of the ground. Asked how long the flight had lasted, he answered, 6 hours, 20 minutes. The recovered voice recorder captured his final transmission, requesting landing as scheduled, Flight 612. The controller's reply was confused, "Repeat your call sign." Then Mercer's voice again, calm, formal, "Why are you using a new frequency? We've been in contact all morning." Investigators found fresh traces of grass and small twigs under the landing gear, as if the plane had recently stood on the ground, but not at any known runway. Soil samples contained pollen from plants native to the Pacific Northwest, not Alaska. Social media rumors spread, claiming an old ghost flight had landed. Airport staff were ordered to stay silent. The official statement called it a routine emergency exercise. Yet that night, a security guard reported seeing lights flicker inside the hangar and shadows moving through the cabin windows. By morning, the entire area had been sealed. No one saw the plane again. Psychologists continued interviewing the passengers. Most repeated the same story: clear weather, smooth flight, then a blinding light outside the windows, followed by the captain's calm announcement that they were landing soon. "It was just light," one woman said, then clouds, then silence. Inside the cockpit, the flight log was pristine. The last entry read, "Visibility excellent, flight stable, crew in good condition." The next page was blank. The ink was fresh, the paper white. How it could survive 4 decades untouched remained unexplained. The official investigation lasted 3 weeks, then went dark. All materials were reclassified as sensitive national data. The final statement read, "The incident involving Flight 612 poses no threat to aviation safety and requires no further inquiry." Yet a leaked note from one FAA engineer contained a single line: "We confirmed the landing. We still don't know where they came from." Airport records still preserve a logbook entry: Flight 612 landed 1:32 p.m., July 7, 1982. Beneath it, written in pencil, landing confirmed April 12, 2024. Two dates separated by 2 years and one flight that seemed to bridge them. Further comparison with 1980s archives confirmed the impossible. Flight 612 had departed Seattle on July 7, 1982 at 7:05 a.m. local time, then vanished after 5 hours. Everything matched: crew names, passenger lists, even the weather reports. Photographs of the passengers taken during medical checks matched the original 1982 IDs with absolute precision. Moles, scars, facial features identical. Biologically, they were still living in 1982. The flight recorder contained a final snippet of conversation, the co-pilot remarking, "These gauges are running backward," followed by, "Did the clocks reset?" Then static. The tape itself was genuine, but didn't match any known magnetic frequency from the era. Fuel tanks were nearly full, containing a blend of aviation, kerosene discontinued since the late 80s, meaning the aircraft hadn't been sitting anywhere. It had kept flying. Every survivor described the same thing: bright light, then clouds, then calm descent. The engines just went quiet. One said, "There was no fear, just silence." 2 days later, the plane was still inside the hangar under heavy guard. That night, security personnel heard the low hum of an engine starting up. Assuming it was a systems test, they didn't intervene. Surveillance footage captured the navigation lights flickering on, then the image distorted. When the guards rushed inside, the hangar was empty. The aircraft had vanished, leaving only tire marks and a scorched line across the concrete. Everyone on duty that night was questioned. No one had seen the plane take off. Radar screens showed nothing. No blip, no signal, not even static interference. One technician swore he'd heard a short radio transmission just before the disappearance: "Landing successful." His statement never made it into the official report. By morning, investigators found a small metal plate on the hangar floor, burned around the edges. Etched into it were the numbers 1982 to 2024. The passengers under observation were gone as well. Surveillance showed empty rooms, beds neatly made, personal belongings left behind, watches, letters, handbags. The airport shut down for a week under the pretense of decontamination. Everyone who had been involved signed non-disclosure agreements. The controllers received new communication protocols, and all system logs mentioning Flight 612 were deleted. In official documents, the incident was renamed False Radar Return. Among staff, one phrase lingered: "It left on the same line it came in." A former controller, dismissed shortly afterward, later told a journalist that the day before the disappearance, someone had requested access to archived navigation tapes from 1982. On those reels, the radar recorded a single blip vanishing at the exact coordinates where the aircraft reappeared 2 years later. That meant Flight 612 hadn't returned. It had simply completed its journey with a 42-year delay. A month later, the FAA issued an official report. It stated, "No verifiable data confirms the landing of any historical aircraft. All available recordings are corrupted, and witness statements contain inconsistencies." Yet in the airport's digital archive, one entry survived: "Signal received from Flight 612, landing 1:32 p.m. Crew reports all passengers alive, Hours later, the file was erased. Online, leaked photographs began circulating. Grainy shots of an old airliner on the tarmac, passengers in vintage clothing standing nearby. The images were quickly labeled hoaxes, though certain details matched restricted documents. Official agencies dismissed them as fabrications not reflecting reality. Months later, the hangar where the plane had stood was demolished. A new security building rose in its place. During construction, workers unearthed a small metal tag stamped with 612/Seattle Anchorage. On the back, a date, July 7, 1982. It had belonged to Captain David Mercer, the pilot who vanished in 2024. Today, Flight 612 remains officially listed in aviation records as missing. In early June 2023, an expedition team led by Professor Henry Albright reached the Laukami Ridge, a remote stretch of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado that had barely been explored before. The trip from the last town took more than a full day, half of it along a washed-out dirt road, the rest on foot through a steep mountain pass. Every piece of equipment had to be carried by hand. The goal of the expedition was simple on paper: to study geological structures and possible signs of early human activity at elevations above 6,500 feet. Funding was modest, the report expected to be routine. No one imagined their work would become one of the most discussed discoveries in decades. The Laukami Ridge region was notoriously difficult to study, harsh, rocky, and almost lifeless. But within days, Albright noticed something strange. The rock formations seemed to not breathe, no moisture, no signs of weathering, as if the stone was not part of the mountain, but something inserted into it. The geologists laughed it off, but noted unusually high density readings in the layers, which in itself was odd. The team set up base near the foot of a slope, where satellite scans had shown several hollow formations. On the images, the voids appeared perfectly round, as if drilled from within. They assumed it was a natural formation, but decided to check. Work went smoothly. Only in the fourth week, when most of the main sector had been mapped, a speleologist named Carter found a patch of rock with a slightly different color and texture. The gray surface turned out to be hollow. After careful drilling, a crack opened, releasing a burst of cold, dry air. It was an entrance. No one went in right away. For 3 days, they reinforced the passage and tested the air for gas content. Then 2 team members entered first with floodlights and a laser rangefinder. At first, it looked like a simple stone gallery about 30 feet long. But soon the walls began to change from rough limestone to smooth, polished gray, green plates. The material resembled basalt, though there should have been none in that region. 20 yards in, the gallery opened into a dome-shaped chamber. The ceiling curved gently. The walls showed faint soot marks and smudges, as if someone had once touched the surface with bare hands. Albright noted no traces of water. The surface is dry, dense, almost glass-like. The first days were calm. They photographed, logged, took samples. It was fascinating but not sensational until one of the students, under the angle of a light beam, noticed barely visible lines on the polished wall. Contours appeared, not drawings, not inscriptions, but more like a schematic. The lines were thin, slightly recessed, connecting upward into an arch. Schleich pattern. When touched, the stone felt warm, though the cave temperature was only about 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Under ultraviolet light, the entire surface came alive. The lines glowed with a soft blue luminescence. Then the full picture became visible. Figures, tall with disproportionately long arms, heads elongated and featureless. From each head, rays extended upward, converging into a half circle that resembled a dome. Above it were abstract symbols, vaguely reminiscent of orbital diagrams. Albright gave no comment. He simply ordered full documentation and forbade any discussion until an official report was filed. In the expedition records, these images were labeled as structured mineral inclusions of unknown origin. The mineral forming the glowing lines turned out to be a rare variant of calcium tungstate, but with an unusual isotopic composition. It could not have formed naturally in those rocks. The age of the layer was determined through microscopic silicon deposits, roughly 12,000 years. Several days later, in a second chamber, they found another wall. This time the lines formed not figures, but a sequence of symbols. A linguistics expert on the team, Dr. John Reeves, noted that some of the markings vaguely resembled proto-symbolic pictograms known from early North American rock art. Yet the structure was too systematic. He said quietly, "This isn't a language. It's an instruction." Everything about it seemed impossible, the angles too precise, the symmetry too perfect. One of the grad students tried calculating whether such incisions could have been made by hand. They couldn't. The depth of the grooves is identical along the entire pattern. He wrote, "The tool moved with mechanical precision, as if guided by a machine." By the third day, photogrammetry showed that the carvings followed a radial pattern. All the centers converged at a single point. That point matched a small cavity beneath the stone surface. Inside it lay bones, a skull, part of a spine, and fragments of ribs. The bones were dense and clean, as if recently washed. The anthropologist confirmed they were human, but with slight differences: a tall forehead, elongated cranium, and widened parietal bones. Albright wrote in his notes, "Not ancient human, not archaic, something else, but close." The remains were sent to a genetic analysis lab at the University of Colorado. The tests took nearly a month. The report read, "Genetic structure consistent with Homo sapiens. Divergence 2, 1%. Sequences identified that do not appear in known genomic databases, possible exogenic insertion." The phrasing was cautious, but the implications were clear. 2% that wasn't a mutation, nor an error. It was another kind of human, too close to be alien, too different to be one of us. A week after the preliminary results were released, chaos erupted across the media. Headlines screamed about a new species of human, pre-flood civilizations, and extraterrestrial hybrids. The Department of the Interior issued a statement calling the information speculative and under review. Within 48 hours, the research site was sealed off. The expedition was forced to pack up. All equipment, samples, and photographs were confiscated, leaving only copies of written reports. Albright and Dr. Reeves signed non-disclosure agreements but maintained quiet personal contact afterward. When the genetic lab confirmed the findings, they requested repeat samples. A week later, an official order came down: suspend all work, seal the materials, restrict access to the site. Everything was documented: signatures, memos, timestamps. Only one thing did not add up. The dates on the paperwork were stamped one day before the lab's official report had even arrived. Soon after, backup files vanished from the university's network. Only a few unsynced logs remained on a geophysics server. Data did not end abruptly. It simply stopped appearing. Leaks began a week later. IT technicians discovered that the expedition's photo archives had been automatically mirrored onto a reserve server. That came to light only during a routine system check. Among the copies were not only scanned reports, but short video clips recorded in the third chamber. In one of them, a beam of light sweeps across the wall, pausing on a figure. The carved lines appear slightly misaligned, layered, as if made of several planes. When the flashlight moves, the shapes seem to realign, correcting themselves. No camera effects, no digital artifacts, just raw footage. Within days, the clips were online. Someone from the team had copied the files and shared them. The first to post was a local Colorado news blog. Soon larger outlets followed. The headlines varied. Unknown symbols found in the Rockies. Ancient carvings show signs of advanced technology. Contact. The government reacted quickly. Region was declared a geological instability zone and placed under restricted access. The official reason: risk of landslides and soil collapse. Yet no such activity had been recorded in the area. Professor Albright was summoned to Denver. According to colleagues, the meeting lasted less than an hour. He never returned to teaching. His laboratory was reassigned to another researcher who had no connection to the project. By that time, the DNA data was no longer being discussed publicly. All documents from the genetic lab disappeared, including backups. Dr. Miles, the head geneticist, resigned for health reasons and stopped appearing at conferences. Still, fragments of data survived among the secondary team members. Their notes mentioned stabilized isotopic ratios of calcium, uncharacteristic of organic remains, indicates artificial mineralization preserving internal tissue structure. In plain words, someone had intentionally preserved the remains. When official media stopped covering the caves, the story moved into underground forums and independent investigations. In early autumn, a group of young archaeologists from New Mexico went to the site on their own. They traveled on foot without permits, reached the main gallery, and stayed no more than an hour. That evening, they hiked down and left the area. Later, one of them told a journalist, "You can't stay there. It feels like the air itself is pressing down on you." The others refused to comment. 2 weeks later, another team arrived, better equipped, with cameras fitted with radiation filters, thermal imagers, and portable light sources. Their goal was to document the carvings. On one device, the recording stopped the moment they entered the main chamber. The image broke into gray static, and the sound turned into crackling noise. Other devices recorded nothing. On all the memory cards, only one file remained, blank, 0 kilobytes. A third attempt followed in November. 2 brothers, former climbers from Utah, managed to reach the old entrance. They were found 2 days later at the bottom of a nearby ravine. One couldn't explain who he was or where he'd been. Doctors diagnosed complete retrograde amnesia without head trauma. The other was in deep shock, silent and unresponsive. Rescuers found only ropes and batteries in their packs, no cameras. After that, the entire area was sealed by the military. Satellite images taken that December showed a pale strip of ground where the cave entrance had been, nearly 160 feet long, as if the surface had been leveled by machinery. In geological databases, those coordinates are now marked Geophysical Testing Zone. No federal agency has explained what kind of testing was conducted in such an inaccessible region. In January 2024, one last trace appeared, indirectly linked to the expedition. A short article surfaced in a scientific journal database titled Isotopic Anomalies in Organic Calcium, credited to H.A. It vanished within 24 hours but was preserved in cached form. The text contained familiar data. Isotope Ca-44 concentration exceeds norm by 1%. Material retains residual energy structure when cooled below 43 degrees Fahrenheit. None of the expedition members were heard from again. The Lakami Ridge no longer appears in any geological reports for 2024. In academic circles, the topic became taboo. No grants, no expeditions, no student fieldwork. Yet the photographs of the carvings still surface occasionally in private archives. In some, the lines look sharper, thinner, refined. Others claim the figures have multiplied, that new shapes now appear on the walls. There is no way to verify that. The originals are gone. Among the few who studied the patterns, a theory remains. The carvings were not art at all. They might have been a storage system, a visual code embedded within the stone itself. If that's true, then the bones weren't just buried remains, but a part of the mechanism. Perhaps what was found in those mountains wasn't meant to be discovered. Officially, the finding is buried, but facts don't vanish. The evidence stands. Somewhere beneath the Rockies, traces of a non-human intelligence were recorded. The only question left is, did they leave? Are they still here? Or are they waiting to return? Goodbye. Thanks for watching.